My name is Lisa. I'm 35 years old and work part-time. I live with my husband, Mark, and our daughter, Emma. Mark has a desk job, and Emma is in first grade. We purchased an old house, which we're still paying off. When Emma began school, I decided to take on a part-time job to help with the expenses. Mark's older sister, Nancy, was married before us and lives with their father in the family home. She believes she should inherit the house since she was the first to marry, and she argues that caring for their father entitles her to it. However, when Nancy married, their mother had already passed away, so she didn't have to care for her father at the time. The house where Mark's parents live is massive. I was taken aback when I first saw it before we got married. The grand entrance, with its elaborate gate and expansive grounds, made me question whether Mark's family was wealthy. But when Mark and I were dating, he didn't come across as being rich. The sight of his parents' large estate was unexpected. Mark explained that his family had once been affluent, but they had fallen on hard times. He laughed, saying that even though his grandparents' house was large, it was old and uncomfortable. He also mentioned that despite their current financial situation, his parents' house was still in a nice neighborhood. I understand why Nancy is determined to keep the house. She forced Mark out so she could live there, and I think she likely wants to have both the house and the land for herself. But I'm not sure if she actually owns the house now. When Mark and I got married, we agreed that since Nancy was taking care of their dad, I wouldn't have to. We decided that Nancy would inherit the house, which is why we purchased our own. Mark thought it would be better for their dad to be cared for by his daughter in case he ever became ill. When we visit Mark's family during holidays, it's clear Nancy doesn't treat their father very well. At mealtimes, it feels like he's excluded from the family. If Mark or I attempt to sit with him, Nancy insists that he prefers to eat alone. Afterward, when I talk to my father-in-law, he tells me how unhappy he is living there. As Nancy creates constant tension, he always eats separately from her family and gets less food, while Nancy continues to take money from him. Despite his meager pension, she doesn't help with his laundry or chores. Instead, my father-in-law does most of the cleaning and gardening by himself because Nancy neglects him. Even her husband and kids treat him poorly. One time, my father-in-law asked Nancy's husband for a ride to the racetrack, and he was scolded. Nancy's son is also rude to him, telling him he smells and should stay in his room. It seems that my father-in-law doesn't remember ever holding his grandson, even though they've lived together since his birth. But when my daughter visits, he enjoys spending time with her and often tells her she's his only grandchild, sounding quite lonely. This breaks my heart. Every time we visit, Mark gets frustrated and tells Nancy to treat their father better. Nancy always responds angrily, accusing Mark of wanting to take the house from her. She insists, "I won't let anyone take this house." It's clear how much she values the property. One day, my father-in-law fell at home. The house isn't elderly friendly, and he tripped over a small step, breaking his right hand. Luckily, there were no other injuries, and he didn't need to go to the hospital. But managing without his right hand was difficult for him. When we visited, we were shocked by how frail he had become. He could hardly move his feet and clearly needed help. Nancy's family completely ignored him, leaving him to fend for himself, even for meals. Mark immediately confronted Nancy. "Why aren't you taking care of Dad?" She brushed it off with a laugh. "A broken hand isn't a big deal. He can walk on his own, and he's not complaining." It seemed like my father-in-law, used to being overlooked, couldn't stand up to her, and she was well aware of this. Mark's frustration grew. "Shouldn't we be the ones looking after our parents?" Nancy smirked and said, "You can take care of him. I don't want an old man with hardly any money." Her callous words pushed me to the edge. "Fine, we'll take him. He won't heal properly if he stays here." Mark agreed, and we decided to move him immediately. As we packed his things, Nancy complained that we couldn't have the house just because we were taking care of their dad. She was more concerned about the house than her own father. Mark ignored her complaints. "Don't worry, I've already bought a house. I don't need this one. You can do whatever you want with it." Nancy seemed relieved, but, even as we packed, she and her husband rummaged through my father-in-law's belongings, looking for anything valuable. When my father-in-law came to stay with us, he seemed much happier, playing with my daughter. He was like a new person. We gave him a spare room, though we hadn't prepared it with handrails yet due to the rush. I'll install handrails later, I promised, feeling bad about the situation. To my surprise, my father-in-law apologized. I'm sorry for making you worry. Do you think $200 million will be enough to take care of me and my horses? I laughed at first. Horses, I chuckled. Taking care of you will probably cost more. But when I saw how serious he was, I realized he wasn't joking. Does it really cost that much to take care of someone? All I have left is $200 million. I panicked. $200 million is more than enough. That's actually too much. We later discovered that he owned racehorses and significant assets he had hidden, wanting to avoid his children fighting over them. When I brought up the idea of making changes to the house, hoping it might provoke their demands, my husband chose that moment to tell me about his father's wealth and his horses. With a reassuring tone, he said to his father, I don't know the costs of maintaining horses, but if you've got $200 million, you should be fine. We'll take care of your expenses, so no need to worry. His words calmed me as well. After checking with the person who had managed the horses, we confirmed there wouldn't be any issues, and we decided to let the horse matter go for the time being. Knowing that my father-in-law was wealthy changed my perspective on him. I couldn't help but think his daughter, who had forced him out despite his affluence, would regret it when she found out. The idea of her regret gave me some satisfaction. Since my father-in-law moved in, our lives had taken a new turn. Between managing my part-time job and caring for him, things were busy, but with my husband's help, we managed. Having my father-in-law at home gave my daughter a new companion, and he seemed to be doing better. His walking had improved, and even though the home modifications weren't finished, he was able to walk with a cane at a slow pace. Despite his hand still healing, he was practicing eating with his left hand. Back in his old home, he hardly moved because his nephew would complain whenever he left his room. Even when he tried to visit the racetrack, his son-in-law showed irritation. That inactivity likely contributed to his muscle weakness and the fall that followed. On sunny days, he enjoyed going on walks with my daughter. I'd been so focused on his recovery that I hadn't paid much attention to my sister-in-law. However, 3 months after his move, she called, clearly upset. Is Dad there? If he is, get him on the phone immediately. At that moment, my father-in-law was out walking with my husband and daughter. When I told her that, her anger only grew. You knew, didn't you? You knew the house was rented. That's why you took Dad, to cause trouble for us. I was confused by what she said. She seemed to be suggesting that their house was rented, but she had always boasted that it was theirs, even if it was in my father-in-law's name. The idea of it being rented didn't make sense. As I struggled to respond, my sister-in-law grew more irate. A man claiming to be the landlord of our family home showed up, saying I'm behind on rent and need to pay or leave. I was even more confused. Shouldn't the landlord of their house be my father-in-law? Did he go to collect rent from her? Just then, my father-in-law returned, so I quickly explained the situation and handed him the phone. With a hint of frustration, my father-in-law spoke to the daughter who had thrown him out. When you told me the house was rented, the truth is, the house was owned by the company where my father was the CEO. I've been paying the rent until you kicked me out. He sounded cold, and my sister-in-law, sensing his anger, yelled into the phone. I didn't know anything about this. I'm coming over right now, so wait for me. About 30 minutes later, my sister-in-law and her husband arrived, looking shocked to see my father-in-law walking unaided. But there were more pressing issues to address. My sister-in-law erupted again. I thought the house and land were yours, Dad. Did you lie to me? Her husband added, forget that. Can you pay the rent now? If you don't, we'll be thrown out of the house. My father-in-law chuckled. Why would I pay rent for a house I'm not living in? After you kicked me out, that's too much to ask. Unable to respond to his reasonable point, my brother-in-law went quiet. This time, my sister-in-law spoke again. Did you plan this from the start, Dad? You seem so much more energetic now, even though you pretended to be injured. I intervened to address her bizarre claim. He's been doing rehabilitation exercises every day, working on walking and practicing with his left hand for eating. My father-in-law added, supporting my explanation. Honestly, being kicked out by you guys turned out to be a blessing. Since moving in with Mark, we all eat together, and I don't feel like I'm a burden. At this, My sister-in-law and her husband went silent, their faces stiff with frustration. Then, right on cue, my daughter came in and unknowingly revealed my father-in-law's true situation. "Grandpa, your horse is going to race in the next race, right?" My father-in-law smiled and replied, "Yes, it'll be racing this Sunday. Why don't we all go watch it?" My daughter ran off excitedly, but my sister-in-law and her husband seemed to grasp the gravity of what had just been said. They quickly turned to my father-in-law. "Wait, Dad, do you own a horse? Are you a horse owner?" With a smug look, my father-in-law replied, "I kept quiet because I knew if I mentioned money, you'd come after it, and I also knew bringing up the horses would make your husband frown." His demeanor shifted from light-hearted to serious, his gaze was piercing, and his words slow and deliberate. "I no longer see someone like you, who disrespects her own father, as my daughter. I knew you only came to me for the inheritance." Shocked by his words, my sister-in-law stood frozen. And with the final blow, my father-in-law declared, "You won't get a single penny from my inheritance." At this, my sister-in-law seemed to lose her composure. Stumbling back, her husband, who had been trying to support her, looked defeated and left the room. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next video. Stay stunned.